chart. That chart's a couple of months old, and if you want to really see something that's sad, take a look at what happened.
With President-elect Donald Trump being the victim of an assassination attempt, let's talk about successful presidential assassinations in American history. And where better to start than the original himself, the great emancipator, Abraham Lincoln. President Lincoln was assassinated by famous actor John Wilkes Booth in Ford Theater on the evening of April 14, 1865. Wilkes Booth was born in 1838 into a family of well-respected actors. He himself was successful enough to perform in William Shakespeare's play Richard III. Why would a young, aspiring actor elect to kill the President of the United States? Well, originally he did not plan to kill Lincoln at all. Wilkes Booth was a known Confederate sympathizer and initially plotted to kidnap Lincoln. John and 6 accomplices intended to capture Abe and take him to the Confederate capital in Richmond, Virginia. However, their plan was foiled because Lincoln never showed up. 2 weeks after their failed kidnapping, Richmond fell to the Union Army, and the Confederates were forced to surrender, halting their war efforts. The Confederates' downfall led Wilkes Booth to hatch an even more sinister scheme. In efforts to preserve the Confederacy, he assassinated Abraham Lincoln. During the show, Wilkes Booth snuck into Lincoln's private viewing box and aimed the .44 caliber single-shot Derringer pistol at the back of Lincoln's head, and fired. Wilkes Booth then leapt onto the stage, breaking his leg, and shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," which translates from Latin to "thus ever to tyrants," the Virginia state motto. Booth managed to escape the theater, meeting up with a co-conspirator and fleeing to Maryland. He was able to have his leg treated by a Maryland doctor, but not too long before a massive manhunt ensued. Wilkes and his partner ended up being found hiding in a tobacco barn by federal troops. His partner surrendered, but Booth did not. The soldiers burnt the barn down and shot Booth, leading to his death later that day. Just 4 terms later, our country would face another presidential assassination. In a much lesser-known instance, James A. Garfield was shot by Charles Guiteau on July 2, 1881, outside of the Baltimore and Potomac train station. Charles had stalked the president for weeks, waiting to fulfill what he believed to be a mission from God. Guiteau specifically chose the ivory-handled .44 caliber British Bulldog pistol because he projected for it to be displayed in a museum someday. He waited for Garfield with a letter in his pocket, addressed to the White House stating, "The president's tragic death was a sad necessity, but it will unite the Republican Party and save the Republic. Life is a fleeting dream, and it matters little when one goes." When Garfield entered the station, Charles ambushed him from behind, firing 2 shots off. One bullet grazed his right arm, and the other struck Garfield in the lower back. Guiteau was inclined to murder the president because of his refusal to designate him to a diplomatic position. He was later found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging on July 21, 1882. Garfield sustained the initial gunshot wounds, but would eventually succumb to infections due to a lack of understanding of medicine at the time. In succeeding years, President William McKinley would be fatally shot during a public meet and greet at the Temple of Music in Buffalo, New York, on September 6, 1901. The shooter, Leon Czolgosz, was a 28-year-old Polish-born anarchist. He arrived in Buffalo not long before the event and bought a .32 caliber Iver Johnson revolver. Czolgosz raised the weapon that was hidden underneath his white handkerchief and fired 2 point-blank shots at McKinley from the crowd. The first bullet was deflected by a button on McKinley's shirt, causing minor damage, and the second penetrated his stomach. A member of the crowd punched Leon to the ground, from which others piled on and started to beat him. McKinley ordered them to stop and claimed he was simply misguided. As blood poured from McKinley's stomach, he said, "My wife. Be careful how you tell her. Oh, be careful." He then died 8 days later with his wife by his side. Being an anarchist, Czolgosz didn't believe in any form of government and stated, "All those people seemed bowing to the great ruler. I made up my mind to kill that ruler." He would be taken to execution on October 29, 1901, and before being put to death said, "I am not sorry for my crime." Possibly the most infamous presidential assassination in American history was actually the most recent. During the beginning of John F. Kennedy's campaign for a second term, he traveled across the U.S., eventually leading him to what he thought to be a swing state, Texas. It would be here in Dallas that his trip came to a halt, as he was shot dead on November 22, 1963, at the Dealey Plaza while riding in a motorcade. It was at the hands of Lee Harvey Oswald that Kennedy would be sniped by a bolt-action rifle from the Texas School Book Depository building. The first bullet pierced through Kennedy's neck and left through his throat, and the second made contact with the back of his head. The car sped off to the hospital as he slumped over into his panic-stricken wife's lap. Kennedy was pronounced dead at 1 p.m. that afternoon. Suspected shooter Lee Harvey Oswald fled the scene, where he was eventually confronted by Officer J.D. Tippit, who he shot and killed with a .38 caliber revolver. Oswald entered the Texas Theater in an attempt to hide from police, but shortly after was taken into custody. After being held at the Dallas City Hall for 2 days, he was being transferred to the county jail when assailant Jack Ruby opened fire upon him. Lee Harvey Oswald was then taken to Parkland Memorial Hospital, where he died. Jack Ruby was arrested, later found guilty, and sentenced to death in 1967. There are a lot of conspiracies surrounding others' involvement in Kennedy's death. However, the truth is uncertain. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications.